Hi, welcome back to another episode of An Animated Conversation. My name is Randy Myers. Today my guest is going to be Shaun Cashman.
Animation really is the knowledge of both things. I knew right then and there that's what I wanted to do. And it really opened my eyes as to what I didn't know. You're not going to get a job. I'm like, somebody's doing it. They were so scary talented. Now, normally I would never do that. I was having like an out-of-body experience my first day.
Shaun Cashman, thank you so much for being a guest today. Hope you're doing well, staying safe.
Yeah, so far so good, all things considered. Doing great, thanks.
So I've been wanting to chat with you for a long time, ever since we've talked about you being a guest and allowing me to ask you a bunch of questions about your career so that we could share it with other people. So let's rewind a little bit. Let's go back to the beginning for you. Tell me about your early years.
My early years, well, I was born and raised in Middletown, Connecticut, so I'm an East Coast guy. Pretty much spent my life there with the exception of living in Florida for a year back in the 80s. I pretty much spent my whole life there until I moved out here to get into this crazy business we're in. I grew up in the Italian North End of Middletown, which was pretty interesting for a guy who's half Irish. But the fact that my mother's Italian, I spent all my formative years there, grade school, high school, and then at the end of town. And I still have lifelong friendships with a lot of those guys to this day, which is really cool.
Did you start out in live action, interested in live action back then?
Well, I've always been interested in, movies and TV, but, right from an early age, a really, really young age, I got bit by the cartooning bug. I think the big lightning strike for me was I was in grade school, and I think I remember watching Disney's Wonderful World of Color one Sunday night, and Walt was showing how they made animated films. My mind got blown by that because I was always doing that, always drawing cartoons. I think I mentioned that I was the definite product of Saturday morning cartoons, and I was a big Hanna-Barbera fan when I was younger, and of course the Warner Brothers shorts. I wasn't really into Disney all that much until later on in my life. As I got a little older, but I was still a kid. I think when I saw Jungle Book is when I really got hooked on Disney stuff. That for me has always been my favorite. That and then later on Fantasia was something I was really blown away by. But I was always kind of a Saturday morning cartoon kid, and I would sit there with my brother watching cartoons, and I would just draw what was on the TV screen and stuff like that. And like I said, that combined with the fact of getting hit with the lightning bolt of how they made animated cartoons by watching Disney, it was like, that's what I want to do. It was one of those moments that you hear about, that cliche of like, I knew right then and there that's what I wanted to do. And that's pretty much the truth for me.
Do you remember what age that was?
I would say maybe second grade.
And did you continue that love of drawing all the way through, elementary school, middle school, high school?
Yes, aside from, liking to draw cartoons, I used to enjoy drawing people's faces, and I would, clip pictures out of magazines and stuff and draw those faces. And then I kind of toyed a little bit with caricature, as crude as it was at that age and stuff like that. But yeah, I was really, if I wasn't drawing, it was a rare occasion at that time. But I always knew that, man, this would be kind of nice to do this all the time.
Do you remember when you realized people make a living doing that people get paid to draw and make cartoons?
I can't remember the exact moment, but it was definitely in high school, because, you start getting pressure in high school to start thinking about, okay, what are you going to do when you get out of high school? And so I either wanted to be like an illustrator, or I wanted to get into animation. But, living 3,000 miles, away from where it all happens, I had no way of knowing how that was done. So I kind of put that on back burner and just kind of concentrated on, well, maybe I can get a job as a commercial artist, design, illustration, or whatever like that. So that's what I decided to do. And that's what I ended up doing when I went to art school. I was an illustration major.
Was there a family member or somebody growing up that always helped motivate you or supported you with this drawing idea?
I was never discouraged from doing it. Okay. And if I inherited any abilities to do what I do from anyone, it was from my father. My father, for a brief time before I was born, went to Hartford Art School. He was a great watercolorist. He had talent, he really did. But it was kind of like he was a young guy, young family, born and raised, he was in the 50s when it happened. So he didn't do that kind of thing, very working class background for my family. So that really wasn't an option, but he never discouraged me from doing it. But I think when I told him I wanted to go to art school instead of like a regular college or as a normal school, as people used to tell me, I think he was a little concerned that I was going to starve, once I got out of school. But I'm a bit of a blockhead, and that's what I wanted to do, and that's what I ended up doing. And at some point, I was going to prove him and anybody else wrong that was really kind of giving me a hard time about it. Because I had this one uncle who asked me one time at a family function. He said, "So what are you going to do when you get out of school?" I said, "I'm probably going to go to art school." He goes, "Oh, you're not going to go to a real school?" And I'm like, "Well, I am going to a real school for me, And he says, "Well, what are you going to do when you get out?" I said, "Oh, my intention is to get into commercial art so I can make a living." He goes, "Well, you might want to think about taking some other courses on top of that too." So it was kind of like I was always kind of running into that kind of conversation all through high school. You know what I mean? So which made me more determined, because I'm stubborn, to kind of make it happen, And so I did. And I ended up going to, when I got out of high school, I ended up going to a small private college at the time called Pear School of Art. And I'll tell you that, unfortunately, I didn't finish all 4 years, but the 2.5 years I was there, it was amazing what I learned. And my drawing abilities just, increased, so much. And I was so happy to have had the short time there that I did. I also did, when I was in high school, you remember the famous artist school course? They're based out of Westport, Connecticut. And initially when they were set up, they had as instructors, or so they claimed, all these famous, illustrators that were going to, critique your homework and correct your homework and stuff like that. But so I took that for a while, and that was pretty cool. I mean, it was really opened my eyes as to what I didn't know, at an early age. But I drew all through grade school, all through high school. I was always doing something. I actually, for a while there, was a freelance, especially in high school. And when I first got out, I was a freelance sign painter. I did hand lettering and all kinds of things. And, signs and menus for restaurants and window glass paintings and lettering and, any kind of art that I felt I could do and maybe make a few extra bucks here and there, I did.
So you went to an art school, not a film school. You went to learn classic art training, right? Painting, drawing, all that stuff.
Yes, I did. Film school came later.
So, because that's what animation is. It's kind of the bridge. It's the combination of the two things. You bring in the art, and then you bring in the filmmaking, and you get animation.
Yeah, absolutely.
So you went 3 years. Why did you leave?
Well, here was the thing with that. It was I was working full time to go to school full time because I was paying for it, and so basically I was going to school from like eight to 4, and then I would drive back home from school and go to work from 5 to 11 at night, pumping gas in a gas station, and then I would get home at 11:30, and then do my homework. So yeah. So after a while, you can probably figure I got very sick. I got very ill. I don't know if I got mono or whatever I did, but whatever it is, I was in pretty bad shape. So
Was there a gap between art school and film school, or did you transition right away?
no. Actually, it's weird. I had this weird kind of point in my life where after I got out of school, I ended up, I was a construction worker for 4 years and just to make a living. And And that was enough to make me realize, okay, well, I definitely don't want to be doing this, especially when I had a couple of close call accidents where I almost, hurt my drawing hand really badly. So I'm like, okay, I got to get out of here. So what I did was I ended up taking this very, very intense film production summer course at NYU back in around 1980. And I went to NYU from like late May to mid-August. And it was like guerrilla filmmaking. We went to school 6 days a week, and then Sundays were filming days. And we learned everything because, like you said, I knew that animation really is the knowledge of both things. And I just figured, well, this is not going to hurt me. And plus, I'm also interested in live action too, just because I was. So I did that. And that was quite an eye-opening experience living in New York for, 3.5 months.
A different lifestyle. So
absolutely.
You mentioned when you were younger, some of the cartoon influences, the Hanna-Barbera and the Warner Brothers stuff. As you got older, and especially as you went to NYU and into live action, what started influencing you then, either animation or live action?
Well, I think what was influencing me as far as animation goes at that point was I grew more of a fan of the classic Warner Brothers shorts than I ever was. It just kind of transitioned that way because I found the sense of humor was to my liking, especially also I was discovering more Tex Avery's work. And so between Tex Avery and Chuck Jones were my two heroes, really. It was like I just wanted to see as much as I could and pick up on their timing and their sense of humor and all that stuff. I was kind of in and out of, Disney features. It just kind of happened that way. I was more interested in shorts, short storytelling, kind of crazy humor and fast-paced timing and things like that, So, and then I also started just really appreciating, I think, that more than I was anything else. I really wasn't a big feature guy. That came later on, and even more so in recent history. Once I started having children, I played a lot of catch up and watching stuff I hadn't seen before, which you can understand, right?
Absolutely understand. Yes. I also wanted to say I think a lot of people, myself included, experienced the same thing that you did with the reaction of people when you say, "Oh, I want to go to art school," and their response is usually, "Yeah, what's your plan B?"
Yeah, exactly.
But there is some, what goes around comes around justification when later on you're making a much better living than a lot of these other people, or than they ever thought you would or could. And so,
well, I'll tell you on that note real quick. I've been doing it now for 26, 27 years. And even though I may not have as much passion as I had when I first started, I still love what I do. And I still have the occasional kind of pinch me moment when I have to remind myself that, hey, this is what you do for a living. It's especially, having, I've had way worse jobs, and, construction being one of them. And, I just realized kind of like how charmed I am and lucky and fortunate in a lot of aspects. But it worked out.
So when did you really start pushing to get into animation?
After I did NYU, I got my first professional job as an artist. And I ended up working in the advertising department at a newspaper, designing ads and laying out ads and, learning how to typeset and all that fun stuff, and learning the printing process. And fortunately for me, I was also able to incorporate illustrating into that as well, because a lot of times advertisers, wouldn't want us to use the old clip art books and stuff like that, and they would want something, and so I was happy to do so, which parlayed into doing freelance illustrations for the editorial page sometimes, which is awesome. And I think after I had that job for quite a long time, I had that job for over 10 years, and I kept, that voice in my head that I wanted to get into animation just never went away. Because they actually, just to backtrack slightly, But after I left college and before I went to NYU, during my time as a construction worker, I actually came out here to California to try and get a job. I had set up some job appointments ahead of time, and I took this horrendously long bus trip from Connecticut to LA. And I've spent 4 days in Hollywood, staying in Hollywood and just making the rounds. And I guess at that time, for a guy like me who's never had any experience, I mean, there just wasn't anything available. So I got back on the bus with my tail between my legs and hoofed it back to Connecticut, went back to, then I ended up getting my job at the newspaper. So like I said, I was there for about 10 years or so, almost 11 years, but that desire just never went away. And then, so by that point, Little Mermaid had happened, The Simpsons was a hit, things were happening. I was at a certain age in my life when I just figured, okay, it's now or never. So that's what spurred me on to just, for real, pack up and come out here. And of course, I got a lot of, the funny thing is, it's like my family, my mother, my father, everybody was all for it, my boss at the time, obviously, who didn't want me to leave, was saying, what are you going to go out there for? There's no work. There's nobody, you're not going to get a job. I'm like, somebody's doing it. You know what I mean? I said, why not me? So I that's the attitude I had. And so I cashed out what little pension I had in my newspaper job and took the money and ran. And I came out here and I gave myself a year to find a job. And if nothing happened within the year, I was perfectly fine with just, going back to Connecticut, because they told me, look, if it doesn't work out, you come back here, you'll have a job. I'm like, okay, thank you. I appreciate that. And thankfully, I didn't have to do that. So
I had a similar experience with, and I think people need to hear this. If you don't get into school or get the job you want initially, if you really want it, you'll keep working at it and reapply. Because it took me 3 times to get into Cal Arts. And I think that was testimony to, I must really want to do it. And the same thing with applying for jobs. You can apply and reapply if you really want it and get better. And similar to you also, I was working at a place in Palm Springs at the time doing T-shirt designs, and there was the final big push. Like, okay, if it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen now. I'm gonna do anything and everything I can to make it happen. It just kind of gnaws at you too. It's like, you have to.
And that's what it was. That gnawing never went away ever, And I just felt that, okay, this is a sign of something bigger than me, and it's like, obviously this is what I have to pursue.
Okay, so let's pick up there then. You do that. You make the big push. You're gonna come out and make it happen. What happened when you came out for that trip?
I had a girlfriend at the time who had relatives out here, and she moved out ahead of me. And then once she got a job, she found a place to live, thankfully. And then I came out once it was okay to cash out my pension and get the money. I followed her out here. And then basically my full-time job was finding a full-time job. So I had really what it amounted to was my portfolio on one hand, and I had a copy of Variety's animation issue that had all the addresses and phone numbers of all the studios, and I literally every day just crossed them off the list, and I just made cold calls and just showed up most of the time. That really wasn't going so well. So because eventually my money ran out, and then the money that my girlfriend was making at the time wasn't enough to sustain the both of us. So I had to go out and get a job. So while I was still job hunting on my days off, I ended up getting a job up at Universal at the theme park on the Back to the Future ride. I was one of those guys standing out front, keeping people in line and doing the spiel every 5 minutes. And eventually ended up actually in the control room running the ride, and thankfully in the air conditioning and out of the heat. But it was like a minimum wage job. And it was just, everybody was half my age, including my boss. And I was pretty miserable about it, but it was better than nothing. And I had to do something to get out of the house and to just kind of break up the monotony of getting turned down for jobs or being told that I didn't have enough experience or there was nothing available. So while I was doing that job, I had tested. Of course, I did tons of tests, obviously. I had done a test for 3 things. I did a test for a show I guess they're not in business anymore. They got swallowed up by somebody. It was for Hearst, and they did a Prince Valiant show. I did a test for an early version of Sonic the Hedgehog, and then I had done a test for The Simpsons. I had studied enough of animation on my own from whatever books I can get my hands on to understand just the basic mechanics and principles. And plus, I had been taking the night courses at the Union in mechanics of animation. So I picked up a few extra things that I didn't know, because that really came in handy doing the Simpsons layout test, because it's so much more than just the layout test. It's extreme animating and, field guides and camera instructions and all that stuff. So it was pretty involved for a guy who had never done anything before. So, but eventually I got a phone call at work up at Universal, and from Mike Wolf at Film Roman, offering me a gig on The Simpsons. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and he said, I'm going to offer you a job as a character layout artist. He says, because they used to grade physically, the directors used to physically grade the tests, and I just passed by the skin of my teeth. And he said, but you have to start Monday. I'm like, now normally I would never do that. I would never leave somewhere and not give notice. Even my minimum wage job at Universal, you know what I mean? It was just kind of like, but I said, I'll be there. So I went and told my boss at lunchtime that day. I said, Sunday's my last day. He goes, what? I said, yeah, Sunday's my last day. He goes, well, what's going on? I said, I got a job offer I cannot turn down. And he said, well, what is it? And I told him what it was. He said, I got a job in The Simpsons. He goes, yeah, right. What's the job offer? And I'm like, no, it's this. I'm going to go work on The Simpsons, and I have to start Monday. And he was all hemming and hawing. He was really disappointed. And he goes, well, he says, unfortunately, in your folder, I'm going to have to put down not eligible for rehire. And I'm like, okay. I said, I don't think that'll be a problem. Me being, I don't even have my first job yet, and I'm telling him that's not going to be a problem. You know what I mean? So that's kind of like how I transitioned from my last animation job into my career.
Where was The Simpsons? In their run, was this real early on? Were they already a hit? Everybody already knew about them.
I joined season 4. They had just moved from Klasky Csupo to Film Roman the year before. I was over on Chandler Boulevard at Film
Chandler,
Roman.
yeah, Chandler and Laurel Canyon, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, right by the railroad tracks.
Railroad tracks, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's where you started working? You didn't do any of the old Klasky Csupo on Cahuenga?
No, never did. Film Roman was my very first gig.
So I think you probably appreciate it more than most people because, and I wish more people did this, you actually had real jobs. You were working at the theme park. You were working construction in the past. So when you got this, you appreciate it. And then you were doing all the hoofing, taking your portfolio around, all that stuff.
Yeah.
I don't think enough people really appreciate it. They get handed their dream job right off the bat, and they never truly appreciate it.
Yeah, I was having like an out of body experience my first day, because it was just kind of like, here I am at a certain point in my life, and this has been a desire since I was in second grade, and all of a sudden here I am, and then it's just kind of like, and then the second they brought over my empty scene folders and told me what my quota was, it was just kind of like, woo!
What was your quota?
Oh God, let me think. It wasn't a footage quota, it was a scene number quota back then. And if I'm not incorrect, I believe it was 16 scenes a week. So it all depended, it was a mix of everything. You can have a close up, and then you'd have this, horrendous, 5-6 field pan that you had to do, which usually would just eat up the clock for you and stuff like that. But I had a pretty good rhythm. I had a pretty good rhythm because I think I had so much drive and ambition in me to kind of like, okay, now it's time to create your reputation. You know what I mean? And I was just so happy to be there. I can't even explain it. I was just so happy and thrilled to be there.
So explain to people what character layout is, because it doesn't exist now, really, for the most part.
No, not really. I don't think so. But it's been a long time since I've been off those primetime shows. So, but back then, basically, character layout was taking the storyboard for a specific scene, and then you had to convert that into full size 12 field animation layout. So basically, you had to rough out the background, put in details in the background. You had to set up your camera field guides and so your camera positions. You had to figure out what action was going to happen. So you had to break down the levels of which characters were going to go on what levels, and then figure out, okay, how are you going to make them act? We all had those old school Panasonic tape decks with the cassettes in there with the track on there, and it would just constantly play, rewind, play, rewind, play, rewind to figure out, in your head what the acting was going to be. So it was basically a combination of scene setup and extreme animating. But I'll tell you, some scenes you're almost animating the whole thing, depending on what the director wanted you to do. And after a few years of being on the show, we were leaving very little open to interpretation to the overseas animators. They didn't have a lot of blanks to fill at
Hmm.
some point. So that's where basically, I told my friend Tim Bailey, who's a director on The Simpsons, who I've known for ages, that I view my time on The Simpsons. I worked 7 seasons on The Simpsons. I went from season 4 to season 12, and by the time I left The Simpsons, I was a director. So basically, that was my schooling. It was on the job training for me. And by the time I became a director, and by the time I moved on to King of the Hill, uh, basically, I did 2 or 3 seasons as an assistant director on The Simpsons. And basically, that's where they kind of train you to be able to do every job of everybody on the crew. Not only learn timing, but you have to fix backgrounds. You have to like put things on model. You have to, so it's a little bit of everything. And they weren't willing to make anybody a director unless that happened. And so my 7 years on The Simpsons was my animation schooling.
So you went from character layout to assistant director to director, right?
Well, I went from character layout, and while I was in character layout, eventually I kind of asked to do some storyboard revisions. But I was still character layout. I was doing all that stuff freelance. And then they would throw me actual storyboard sequences to actually board out. And then from that, I expressed interest in being an AD. And so they made me an AD, and I was an AD under Pete Michaels and Mark Irvin and Neil Affleck, and that's where I really learned the ropes about timing because I had never done that before either. I mean, and it was so intimidating, you know. I thought to do timing because to me it just looked like a big Thomas guide. You know what I mean? For those who remember what Thomas guides are, you know. But I got the hang of it fairly quickly and found out that I really enjoyed doing that. And so after 2 or 3 seasons of that, I kind of inadvertently got a job ADing on the hiatus from The Simpsons. I got a job ADing on King of the Hill, which was also done at the studio. So I AD'd for a couple of episodes there. And then I kind of pushed Jim Reardon, who was supervising director on The Simpsons. I said, hey, if you got a slot of just one show open, I would love the opportunity. And because I had already directed like an episode of King of the Hill by that time, so he gave me the opportunity to direct on The Simpsons, which was kind of like one of my goals when I got on the show. Was, man, it would be so cool to end up being able to direct an episode. Now I am one of those few people in the history of the 30 some odd years of history of The Simpsons that I've only directed one episode. But I that was a personal thing for me because once that episode was done, I was offered a full-time directing gig on King of the Hill, and I had to take that. So,
Come on, that gives you a lot of clout to say you directed on The Simpsons.
well, yeah, yeah. I never really used it as clout, but it did help. It didn't hurt. But I also think what helped me more than anything was how long it was on The Simpsons,
Yeah.
and it showed a progression of movement within all the different kind of disciplines of things to do. So.
So what's the time period we're talking about? You started out as a character layout. How many years did it take till you got to transition up the ladder?
Well, I think by the time from when I started, I think I got my character layout job in '93. And I think by 96 or seven, it might have been 4 years. I think that's when I started ADing. And like I said, I did that for 2 or 3 seasons after that. So between 93 and 97, I, kind of let them know that I was interested in doing other things. And that's when they started throwing me board revisions and boarding sequences and stuff like that. I also ended up working on some of the uh, Simpsons commercials that they were doing in house too, as freelance. Now, also during this time, I was one of a handful of people that used to do all the marketing illustrations of The Simpsons for Fox. So it was like 24/7 Simpsons for years for me. I can draw those guys in my sleep. You know what I mean?
And you mentioned a couple of people that you worked with, but do you ever interact with Matt Groening, Rich Moore, any of those guys?
Well, yeah. I mean, when I became an AD, I would go to Fox with whoever was directing the episode and sit there for the animatic screenings and the color screenings. Yeah, and I got to meet Matt, Mike Scully. I didn't meet Rich Moore until I did some freelance layouts for The Critic, and he was working on that. So I did some stuff for him on a show he was directing, but I never really got to know those guys too well.
Okay.
Yeah, it was more once I became a director on King of the Hill, I got to know those guys better and more intimately, I'd say, than the Simpsons guys.
The
Yeah.
Simpsons are kind of legendary for how they'll do a board, put it through animatics, then rewrite stuff, redo the animatic. You were obviously aware of that process.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. Especially my one Simpsons episode uh, actually had a very, very long production life because of reasons like that. Rewrites, not being able to get the guest star for the show that they wrote the story for. So they had to rewrite the episode, and yeah, so it was a lot of start and stop and a lot of animatics. And yeah, it was, I tell you, it was kind of a nightmare.
And those were like old school animatics because those were pre like now everybody uses Premiere or a software, but those were like back in the day where it was almost like making an episode without color and final drawings. It was completed pretty much.
Yeah, and it was very strange. The difference between doing animatics for The Simpsons and doing animatics for King of the Hill was that the Simpsons producers didn't want us to put too much. Actually, they didn't want us to put any temp track in their music, and no sound effects. They just wanted to hear the story and the jokes.
Yeah.
King of the Hill, on the other hand, we got to actually make, as directors, little movies for our animatics, and we even ended up doing title sequences for our animatics and stuff because they loved it. They loved it. Actually, I did an animatic on King of the Hill where I used pretty exclusively for temp track. I used Randy Newman's music for The Natural,
Mm-hmm.
and it went over so well that Greg Daniels turned to the composer at the meeting and said, "Get as close to that as you can without us getting sued." So I felt good as a director for making that choice. You know what I mean? But it was much more fun. But I also had a show where I had a 54-page script, and I tried to tell them, okay, well, this is going to be way longer than a 22-minute episode. I said, can we make cuts? I said, because this is going to be a lot of work in our part that's going to get cut. And they said, no, 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 we want you to do it. We want you to do it. So the animatic ended up being almost 45 minutes. And yeah, it was almost 2 episodes because there was not only an A story, a B story, but there was a C story that involved Grandpa and Bobby Hill that had nothing to do with anything else. And that C storyline was in itself 110 scenes that we had to lay out and do. And then it was obvious once we saw the animatic, they said, okay, well, we're gonna have to jettison that stuff. So I had in my office for years a stack of 110 scenes of full layouts that just never saw the light of day.
How long were you on King of the Hill?
I was on King of the Hill from season 2 through season 11.
Do you have a lot of interaction with Mike Judge?
Yes, I actually did. He was pretty cool. I met Mike. We were on a press junket in Austin, Texas for the show. and they were screening a couple episodes at I think it was the Paramount Theater down there. That was going to be the opening for a comedy festival that they have every year. So after that, we all went to a party, and I got to meet Mike Judge. He's a great guy.
Yeah.
He's really cool. Got a really dry sense of humor, really down to earth.
What happens after King of the Hill? Where do you go?
Right after King of the Hill was the only time of unemployment I've had in my career, thankfully. It was short. I think I was out of full-time work for about 5 months, but I was doing freelance. I was doing freelance timing for, a couple studios, Disney included. So that took care of most of that time, thankfully. And then I got a call from Brian Cheesley. He was working at Cartoon Network on Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. And now I knew Brian at that point very peripherally. We had crossed paths and stuff. Of course, over the years, I've gotten to know him much better. He says, there's a director slot opening here. What are you doing? I said, I guess I'm going to go down there and try and get that director slot. He goes, yeah. So he put me in touch with Lewis, the producer. And now, again, this is another fortunate thing that happened was he says, okay, look, here's the deal. Lewis is very kind of right to the point. He goes, it's a 5-month job, and then the show's going to end. He says, take it or leave it. I said, I'll take it, So I took it, and that 5-month job turned into 5 years at Cartoon Network. Between Billy and Mandy and Chowder, it was 5 years worth of work.
You rolled right off of Billy and Mandy onto Chowder?
Yeah, because Carl took pretty much everybody from Billy and Mandy for Chowder. So yeah, I worked on the season 1 of Chowder before I moved on to Nickelodeon.
Any fond memories of Billy and Mandy?
Oh, I have to tell you, and I say this all the time, much to the chagrin of my buddies on The Simpsons. As fun as The Simpsons was, I have to tell you that professionally and personally, my time on Billy and Mandy was my favorite point in my career. So up to the point now, I have to say that my recent history at Disney equals that.
What made it so enjoyable on Billy and Mandy?
Well, two things really. First was it was very liberating for me because I had to learn from going prime time to going cable directing, which is two totally different mindsets. Mm-hmm. And I had to go from working on King of the Hill to Billy and Mandy, which was a whole nother mindset again. Now, once I started on Billy and Mandy, I realized this is the kind of stuff I want to do. Short 7-11 minute, just crazy, wacky stuff. And once I actually gave myself permission to kind of do what I felt was right as far as timing sensibilities and stuff, the doors just opened, and it was I don't know, it was like I had always been there. It was great. And my relationship with the crew and my relationship
with Adam, or Maxwell Adams as he's known, was really fantastic.
Quite an experience. Really good all the way around.
Yeah, Billy and Mandy's a lot closer to the early influences you talked about. It's a lot more Chuck Jonesy, Tex Avery.
Yep, yeah. Absolutely. And not only did you get to kind of like be involved in the storyboard pitches and make notes on storyboard pitches. It's like once the show was recorded and it was ready to be timed, it was just you and your show, and for 3 weeks. And it was, I loved it. It was, and our crew was always going out to lunch together. We were always doing stuff after work. And we'd have people on other crews saying, do you guys really like each other as much as it looks like? And I'm like, yeah, we do. We have a great time. We're all here for the same reason,
It's funny. People don't realize how that doesn't always happen. It doesn't always happen that you get along with the crew and you like the show that you're working on and you're happy with the end result and the public likes it too. Those
Absolutely.
The planets aligning like that does not happen all the time.
Absolutely.
The things that people don't appreciate, Shaun, is the dynamics on a crew where you have some people with a lot of experience and then some younger newcomers, and how that you can like feed off each other that way and learn from each other that way. Did you have that experience on Billy and Mandy?
I had that experience, not quite. There was a couple of board artists that they brought on at some point that it was their first gig. I had that experience on King of the Hill as well. There was a couple of crews I had where most of the layout crew were green. So before I got to Billy and Mandy, I kind of had experience of learning how to kind of deal with that and work with that and kind of make things happen and really kind of do the dance. And the only two people on King of the Hill at that time that were Clay Hall and myself. So they had asked me, would you be willing to give classes to each crew for a week before they come in and start working? And I'm like, absolutely. So I had one guy who ended up working on the show and is working on The Simpsons. He did his week. And at the end of the week, he came into my office and he says, I can't do this job. I can't do this. I'm like, yeah, you can. You can do it. No, I can't do it. I said, you do great work. You can do this job. It's not brain surgery. You can do it. Don't be afraid. And it took all I can do to get him not to quit right then and there. And then he decided, okay, he came back Monday for his first day on the job, and I think he worked almost the whole run of King of the Hill, and he's been on The Simpsons for years now. You know, he had that weird combination of things that you don't see all the time in an artist. Is he had a good work ethic, he had the ability, and he had the character, you know, personality. You know, you don't get those three together all the time. And I think just the fact that he felt that he could come talk to me about having doubts about doing the job said a lot for him. You know what I mean? He could have just quit and never would have saw him again, but he didn't do that. And you know, so you know, there was a lot of times when, you know, artists would come to me with their work, and I would have to find ways of diplomatically kind of walking them through how they can do things differently or do it better or whatever the case may be, without kind of making them feel like they did a lousy job or they're not good at what they do. Because I've been on the receiving end of that, and I remembered how that made me feel, and I didn't want to make anybody else feel that way.
I think people don't realize outside of a creative industry how delicate the ego can be for an artist, because they really want to do good work. They want it to be appreciated, and they want to grow as an artist. And those critiques of whether it's school, but much more professionally, can really affect them positively or negatively. And you have to be careful, like you're saying, your approach, your words, they can affect those other individuals. And you want to encourage that. You want them to grow. Like you saw something in this person, and you wanted to encourage them because you knew they could do it, but they doubted themselves. And it's funny how so many artists, at some point, if not all the time, doubt themselves and their abilities.
Oh yeah, I've had, you know, in my time as a professional in animation, I've had moments, freak out moments where, you know, I was at the point where it's kind of like, I don't know if I can do this.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And seriously, just like sweat and nerves, you know what I mean? But you got to plow through that, you know, you got to plow through that. You know, it's funny too, because to make your point in another way too, is that, you know, I briefly just recently taught up at Cal Arts for 3 years, and I taught I did the filmmaking workshop, which is basically, you know, students working on their year-end projects, their animated films which is a, you know, good chunk of their grade. And there was a lot of that involved too, was, you know, because we'd have critique sessions every week, and okay, what did you do the week before? So basically it was a lot of that same thing going on there, and I think it's probably it was more important that I be kind of more diplomatic about it and more delicate about it, but and be as straight as I could, because they have not been out in the workforce, and
Right.
they haven't really been beaten up yet. You know, so I felt like they're probably a little bit more sensitive to what they're working on and have more of their heart in what they're working on. And so in order to bring the best out into them, you know, I felt like I really had to ramp up my responses to them more so than I would if I was, you know, on a crew in a studio. But I have to tell you 2 things. They were so scary talented. All the students, scary talented, that it's a lot of times I would say to myself, it's like, I'm teaching you, you know, this is crazy. And the other fact is reminding myself that here I am teaching at a school that turned me down twice for college. So there was a lot of weird irony going on there, but But yeah, there is, you have to, as a director, there's a lot of people management skills you have to learn, and some directors have it, some directors don't. And, unfortunately, that's the way it rolls.
Well, I think your experiences and being on both ends of that contribute to your ability to have that awareness. Too often nowadays, people are given opportunities without having gone through that, and they don't have those people skills. They're not aware of them. They don't know how to communicate with people on their teams to get the best out of them. You have to have that awareness and understanding, that appreciation to really make it work with a team, like managing a team. I similar to you, when I was at CalArts, you want to prepare them and you want to encourage them at the same time. So I used to warn them that being at art school, you will get better, but it's going to be like a long, steady, gradual thing. But once you enter the industry, the curve kind of changes, and it's either you figure it out and get it done, or they'll let you go and find somebody who will. And
Absolutely.
that's where you have to get rid of that mindset that I'm a student and I have time, and you have to convince yourself, wait a minute, I'm a professional now. They're giving me money to do this now.
I tell you, I tried to give them doses of reality as best I could without freaking them out, because I took a quick roll call one day, and I said, okay, when you get out of here, who wants to be what? What do you want to do? And I never had more than 10 students in my class, which was great. And usually 9 out of 10, maybe 8 out of 10, all wanted to be storyboard artists. And I'm like, okay, great, because they really push story up there. I said, here's what it's like doing a storyboard on a network television show. And I got the whiteboard out, and I just ran through the whole schedule and what they had to do at a certain point in the schedule and how much work was involved. And so they really got a clear picture of how much work storyboarding is now, especially. And when I was done with that little presentation, they were all just kind of sitting there, with their eyes wide open, mouths hanging down. And I'm like, I'm not trying to scare you. I'm just trying to, give you a warning. I mean, I had you and Robert come up and talk to them. You know what I mean? You remember that. And I thought you guys really spoke volumes of the reality of what to look forward to, not to scare them, but to maybe make them a little aware of, like you say, okay, I'm not in school anymore. I'm getting paid to do something, and now I have to perform. You know what I mean? So
I think Robert's intention was to scare them.
Well, but I think that doesn't hurt. That doesn't hurt. But he's got way more years of experiences to share than either me or you, and and he's been through the whole gamut of the growth and change of this industry. So it's he's got a lot to say.
I think if Robert had his choice, he would like to put every young person coming into animation into like a boot camp, and he'd be like the drill instructor from Full Metal Jacket, shocking them into reality. But
or spend the night in a box from Cool Hand Luke.
That's right. You'll learn one way or the other. So Cartoon Network, you did Billy and Mandy. You worked on Chowder right after that with Carl Greenblatt, his show. And then where'd you go?
Yeah, so during my time on Chowder, Eric Robles was at Cartoon Network as a character designer, and he was doing a short for Frederator over at Nickelodeon. And so what happened was, I guess that year I had won an Annie for directing Billy and Mandy, and so he was at the Annies with Fred Seibert, and Fred said to him, "You know that guy?" He goes, "Yeah, we work together." He says, "You need to talk to him about your short." And so Eric came to talk to me at work and said, "I'm doing this short. It's 2D, and I'll give you the board. Let me know if you want to do it. I'd like you to direct it." And I'm like, "Awesome." So he gave me the board. I had the track, and he asked me if I had any board notes, and I said just a few, and I said, "Yeah, I'll do it. I'm on board." So I had this little freelance job of directing this short for Eric. About 3 weeks into timing the show out, he came back to tell me, "Oh, Fred says we should do it in CG," and I'm like, "Eric, I've never worked in CG before." He goes, "Don't worry about it. We've got a small company here in Hollywood that says they want your sheets." I'm like, "Really?" And I'm like, okay, great. Then I'll finish timing the show out. He goes, absolutely. I'm like, so I went down with Eric and met these guys, and they had very few questions. They could read sheets, which is unusual, And long story short, I guess it was a weird situation where I guess the final choices were Fanboy and Chum Chum and Adventure Time. They passed on Adventure Time. Yeah, Fred brought that to Cartoon Network, and then Fanboy became a series. And so I got a phone call from Eric saying, I want you on board, So I went on board as a kind of a combination supervisor, producer, director. And so that's how I moved from Cartoon Network to Nickelodeon.
And then how long were you on Fanboy and Chum Chum? Were you on the
I was
entire
on
run?
No, I was on season 1, which was about 2.5 years, actually, and moved on to Penguins of Madagascar after that as an episodic director.
So you cut your teeth on CG with Fanboy and Chum Chum, and then you took that knowledge and went on to Penguins.
Yes. Yeah. And I'll tell you, it was a weird learning curve, trying to, because, basically when I got on Fanboy, we had 2 camps. We had the 2D camp, designers, board artists, directors, editors, and then I had my counterparts who handled all the CG stuff. So there was a supervising producer on the CG side too. So the 2 of us were constantly, cross-pollinating and just kind of making sure that this is what everybody wants and this is what we need, and all that thing. So yeah, I did. I cut my teeth on Fanboy big time.
And Penguins won Emmys, right?
Yeah, actually, I my almost 5 years at Nickelodeon were very fruitful for me. I won an Emmy on Fanboy for producing, and I won 2 Emmys for directing on Penguins. The first Emmy we won a daytime Emmy for the whole directing staff, because that's how they do it in daytime. And but it won on an entry of an episode that I had directed, so I felt really good about that. So I enjoyed that. And then the second one that the show won was a primetime special. That was a big win.
So your position on Fanboy and Chum Chum, it was producer or supervising producer? What were you doing on there?
I supervised the board artists with Eric up to a certain point. I supervised the editors and the directors. Okay. So it's kind of like a supervising director and producer. But then I also was spotting sound effects and going to mixes and all that kind of stuff too. And then when I went to Penguins, I was just episodic director. We had a great crew of people I worked with. I had my own board artist, my own board revisionist, my own editor that we worked together all the time in every episode. And I loved the show. The show was a funny show, and it was a lot of fun to work with.
So you would just get assigned an episode, and you were in charge of that episode and see it all the way through the entire process?
Yeah. Well, up until the animatic was approved. Yeah. And then I get another episode.
You weren't involved when it came back from overseas with any post?
No, the supervising producer and the supervising directors handled that, and the showrunners to a certain extent.
After Nickelodeon and Penguins, is that where you went to Titmouse and did Randy Cunningham, or what happened?
Yeah, I went to Titmouse. I got a phone call. I was at a point thinking, okay, I probably should look for another job. Out of the blue, I got a phone call from Jackie Buscarino, who I had known and worked with from Cartoon Network, and she was producer on Randy Cunningham. And they said, hey, we're doing a show for Disney XD, and we're looking for a supervisor. You interested? I'm like, I'm interested in coming down and talking to you about it. She goes, yeah, come on down tomorrow. So I went down, met with her, met with the showrunners, Scott Thomas and Jed Elenoff, and we hit it off right away. And a couple of the Disney execs, Daniel Weinman and Mark Buhai, were there. And they were based out of Disney XD in London. So it was a Disney European production that we were doing here. And so they showed me the sample animation. It was kind of like this real quick short that they had made. And it put the hook in me right away. I was like, okay, yeah, I'm your guy. And so I got hired, went down to work at Titmouse, and worked. We did 100 episodes in 4 years.
Okay, so here's the interesting thing about that. A lot of people don't know this. Like, Titmouse was a small independent studio.
They still were at the time.
Yeah, and Randy Cunningham, this was a big deal because it was with Disney. Then it was also a big deal because it was going to be done in Flash. Um, but there's this misconception about Flash, and Randy Cunningham was a great example of how Flash can really look like traditional 2D animation if you give it to the right people.
Yes.
And I think it was incredibly successful with the action and the fluidity. The character designs were funny and interesting. The writing was funny and interesting. The voices were good. But
Yeah.
you weren't in a big studio like a Nick or a Cartoon Network or anything like that. I remember visiting you at the studio, and you guys were housed up on the second floor, pushed into a corner. Everybody was sharing rooms and stuff. So it didn't matter where you were doing it. If the material was good, what ended up on air would also be good.
Absolutely. And a lot of that, I have to give credit to Boulder Media in Dublin, because they were the studio. They did the entire series. And, we went through the ups and downs of getting this thing off the ground with Disney and trying to figure out how far can we push it? What are the capabilities? What can you do? What can't you do? And Rob Cullen, much to his credit over there at Boulder, and his whole crew, they worked so hard to give us what we wanted. And I think they were just so successful in that, because they ended up doing Foster's Home for Imaginary Friends after that.
Yeah. They also did El Tigre for Jorge over at Nickelodeon
Yes.
too.
Yes. Yes, they
They've
did.
done a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, they're great, and they continue to do good work. I think if we didn't have Boulder, I don't think it would have worked out half as good as it did. We had a great crew at Titmouse. Otto Tang was our art director, and the writers were awesome. And we had killer board crew.
Yeah.
So we really did. And I brought people in from New York to come out, and people that were out here. And so we had a big mix of because it was more of a action comedy series and not a comedy action series.
Yeah.
I tried to mix the storyboard crew with a little bit of both. And then once we got our feet, firmly on the ground, try to mix that up a little bit and have the comedy guys try the action, have the action guys try the comedy. And, it didn't always work. And other times we had some nice surprises. And
I know.
yeah.
You had I know Mike Milo worked on that, and Scott Byrne worked on that. You had a pretty good crew. And again, it's a mix of guys with lots of experience and some younger people coming in. And
I gave a good friend of mine who was my AD on The Simpsons, Josh Tabak, his first shot at being a director on Randy Cunningham. Because I knew he could do it, no problem. But he not only proved himself, but he just went above and beyond.
Yeah.
Did awesome work.
My understanding is you had an agreement with Boulder that a portion of each episode would be rigged in Flash, puppeted or whatever, and then other stuff they would actually animate in Flash.
Yes.
So you would have that more dynamic, more fluid, less left to right, up and down kind of feel, hinged joints. So you mixed it up, but they agreed to that, and I think it's those elements that make people kind of stand out and are very surprised by the level of work in that, because there's some really great animation that's very dynamic and fluid, especially with him as a ninja and the flowing scarf and all that stuff.
Yeah.
Tumbling and things like that. There was a lot of really good strong, just straight animation.
Yep. Well, we tried to give them as many poses in the boards, especially during the action sequences. Then, of course, we really worked the timing in the animatic stage. And I also think a lot of that had to do with the fact that I felt we gave Boulder everything they needed, you know what I mean, as far as what to work with. So hopefully there wasn't a lot to decipher, but, they got it. They got it, no problem. And I also think too it was a good thing because it was a scripted show. It wasn't a storyboard driven show. And Jed and Scott they were great partners to work with as showrunners go, because they really wanted to do what was how best could we tell the story in the animation, and you know what I mean. And so I was able to have them not be as descriptive in the action sequences in the script as they probably normally would have been. I said, leave it kind of, leave a gray area, leave it, just give us the start and the end part, and kind of hit some bullet points like what you want to see, and let the storyboard artists go to town. You know what I mean? Because it's like they have so little clay to mold anything out of here because it's a script. And a lot of the crew were used to working from, board shows where they were actually helping to write the story, write the jokes, write the dialogue, as well as draw it. So I think that also helped in the kind of stuff that we ended up giving Boulder to animate.
Was this the first time those showrunners had ever done anything in animation?
As far as running show, yes. They had written some stuff in animation before, but this was their first show. And it's a real quick, funny story. I said, so how did you sell this story to Disney? He says, well, they called us in and wanted to know if we had any ideas for sitcoms. And so we went in there with one main pitch that we were kind of hoping to sell. Then we had the secondary idea because they always ask you for something else. And then we had this idea in case, for an animated show. And so basically, if I'm paraphrasing, but after their pitch was done, they said, so you got anything else? And they said, well, we got this idea for an animated show. Okay, well, what is it? He goes, well, all we have is a title. What's that? Randy Cunningham, Ninth Grade Ninja. And that's how they sold the show. I probably would have went with it based on that title onto itself, as well. So here I am. I started in traditional 2D. I went to CG and Nickelodeon. Now I'm working with Flash at Titmouse. It was all educational for me as well.
What's the common thread through all that stuff?
The common thread is that you have to know the limitations of it up front, because especially in CG, if the asset builders don't know how far you want to push these characters, they can't rig it that way. And if they haven't rigged it that way, more often than not, you're not going to be able to get some really extreme animation that you're looking for, because that's what we found out in Fanboy early on. But thankfully, it was so early in the process that they were able to kind of break things out and give us what we were looking for, because we were looking for a lot of crazy, Tex Avery take, squash and stretch, typical 2D, theory and element in the CG TV show. So then when I went to Titmouse, I had to learn what the limitations were for Boulder working in Flash. And, but, in the big picture, there really weren't many. Because I actually had one shot, because I directed the first 2 episodes and the last 2 episodes of the run. And I had them, I said, can you do a crane shot with the camera in Flash? And they said, yeah, they were a little reluctant, but they did it, but because they had to build a whole bunch of, rigs for it and stuff, but they could do it. And it came out wonderful.
Okay, so you were there, you said you directed the beginning and the end, but you were there for the entire run of Randy Cunningham, right?
Yes, I was there from the beginning to the very last day.
Take us after that. Randy Cunningham wraps, and then
so Randy Cunningham wraps, and I was thinking that maybe I can parlay this into getting into Disney through the back door. And I'm thinking, well, I've always wanted to go work for Disney. Maybe now's the time to try and see if I can make it happen. So I was out of work for about a month and a half, but I was taking the time off because, I needed it. And then I got a call from Eric Coleman. Or actually, I called Eric Coleman. I said, can we have lunch and meet? And so I went and had lunch with him over in Sonora. And he goes, what are you looking to do? I said, well, I'd like to, do what I normally do, is help run a show. I said, to me, that's really fulfilling to me, is having my hands in from A to Z. I said, I really enjoy that. He says, we have a show in development, he said. He says, that's getting close to being greenlit. He says, how would you like to come on board as a supervising producer? And I'm like, I would love to, but it doesn't have a green light. I said, he goes, no, you let me worry about that. I said, okay. So it was Billy Dilly, Aaron Springer's show. So that's how I got into Disney. I got hired on Billy Dilly as a supervising producer.
You went Billy Dilly, Star vs. Forces of Evil, and then Big City Greens, right?
In between Billy Dilly and my time on Star, I did 2 tours of duty on Pickle and Peanut.
Did you do Future Worm?
Oh, Future Worm. Yeah. So my first about year and a half, 2 years at Disney, I was in the reeds, as Jay Francis likes to say. And then Lisa Salamone graciously offered me a directing gig on Future Worm, which I was happy to take. That didn't work out. And so they basically asked me if I wanted to go on Star because they had a position on Star that basically was like what I'm doing now on Big City Greens, which is what I like to jokingly refer to as animation janitor. But it's really a timing supervisor and retake director. So it's 2 jobs, which is fine because I'm happy to do that. And they were still doing sheets on Star because they were still being, still doing 2D traditional animation. I had a crew of board revisionists and 2 timers, and I also handled retakes, even though most of the retakes were handled by the supervising director. But I was involved in like revising timing and fixing poses and stuff like that. I was on end of season 2, all of 3 and 4, and from there I moved on to Big City Greens, where I've been ever since. And
Wow.
it's been a great run on Big City Greens. I found a home there. I found another home there. Star was good too. I really enjoyed working on Star, but Big City Greens, like I said earlier, is more reminiscent to my time working on Billy and Mandy. That's the closest thing that's come to that so far in years. So I think if they'll have me, I'd like to just stay with it until it runs its course and then see what happens after that, if possible. But I'm happy where I am right now. And I feel, the Hope brothers, who are my bosses, are glad to have me. They respect me. They ask me my opinion. They welcome my input. So it's in a weird way, I get to do a lot of creative decision making and fix things and make them better without really doing a lot of the heavy lifting, for lack of a better term. But I still feel like I'm contributing. And it's a crew of people. They really have a knack for hiring awesome people. And again, we all get along real well, even remote working like we have been since March. I do miss the studio, though. I have to tell you, I miss that atmosphere. And I really do look forward to the day when we can all go back safely and kind of do that again. But working remotely after the initial glitches and stuff, it's been fine.
You've actually got to touch a lot of amazing properties over your career. So
absolutely. Like I said, I no one feels luckier than I do. I've always managed to kind of land on something that has legs. You know what I mean? Whereas you don't go to work for 6 months and then you're out of work again, or you don't go to work for 9 months and you're out of work again. I've always, with the exception of just maybe a couple of occasions, I've worked years on all the projects I've been on.
what I'm hoping is that people who will watch this, some of them will be people who are considering getting into this industry. So if there's any advice you have or suggestions you might have, we talked a little bit about the attitude of don't give up. If you really want to do it, keep at it. But do you have any other advice for people coming in? And also, you're probably working with people who are new to this industry now. Are there things that you're noticing about them that you either have told them or would like to tell them too?
Yeah, I would say, if it's possible, if they don't have the opportunity, like I didn't have to actually go to school and learn animation, but if I think if they can learn enough about it on their own, which I think is more available and more open to people now more than ever, learn as much as you can about the actual process of whatever it is you want to do, so at least you have some kind of knowledge about it, so that when you get to work, you're just not hit or blindsided by, okay, now this is what you got to do, you got to give it to us on Friday, or whatever, just kind of, try and find out as much as you can up front. If you know people in the business, pick their brain, ask them questions, find out, and also have a clear idea of what it is you want to do. Because I know I've had people tell me, what would you like to do in animation? Oh, I don't know. I'd like to do whatever. I'm like, no, that's not going to work, because there are so many different jobs to do. Just kind of tell them, look, if you want to be a board artist, tell them you want a storyboard. If you want to be a designer, tell them you want to be a character designer or a BG layout artist, or if you want to be a color stylist. I said, there's so many opportunities, but be clear on what you want to do. Just don't say, I'll do whatever, because that doesn't work, because that doesn't help you find what you want to do. But I think it's really just plain and simple. It's just if you have the desire and the drive, just go for it. Just go for it. I mean, I think that's going to be a different experience for anybody that feels that. Everybody's got a different story. I hired we have a storyboard artist on Big City Green,
who I originally hired on Star versus the Forces of Evil as a storyboard revisionist, and we only found out about her because one of the directors saw samples of her work online.
So we tracked her down, we got a hold of her, and we asked her to take a test, and she banged the test out in like a matter of days. And it was just like, oh my God, this is wonderful stuff. And she came on board, and within a year, I think she was storyboarding. Because she, again, work ethic,
Yep.
ambition and drive, and talent.
Yeah.
There you go, because your talent's only going to get you so far. You know what I mean? People, I find that people will put up with your talent, even if you have kind of a lesser personality. They'll put up with you to a certain extent if you have talent. But if you have talent and personality and the drive, that's what I mean by work ethic. I mean, that's a home run. So I think sky's the limit if you have that.
Yeah, you'll find a career in this industry if you have that, for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah. All right, Shaun, well, I'll let you go.
Thank you, Randy. This is awesome. I'll see you soon.
Thanks, Shaun.
Bye-bye.
Randy.